we have John from California who wants to talk to us. John, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Going good, John. How can we help you?
So, I consider myself a biblical literalist. In order to do that, though, before I even went into that, basically the thing that formed my beliefs is I had seen a lot of people talk about the Bible. I'd always, heard people talk about the Bible, but without having read it myself, without actually knowing what it was about, I really didn't feel that qualified to talk about it. So the first thing I wanted to do was go through, try to figure out what it meant. And then because it's not in English, obviously, also, I'm not literate in Greek, obviously, but I'm limited a little bit, but try to find enough about the source language to just be able to see, because people do like to play word games in translation. It took me all of about 10 minutes to figure out that nobody knows what the Lord's Prayer means, which to me has actually just kind of been one of the most significant things. As somebody who goes to church, as somebody who takes religion seriously, how can we do that, though, if we don't know what the Lord's Prayer means? Like that's it.
Well, tell me about that. What's your specific criticism with the common interpretation of the Lord's Prayer?
The phrase that gets translated as daily bread is actually a Greek word that nobody has ever used in any other context, that we don't have an actual hard, we can't translate directly. It was a compound created by Jesus that we've mistranslated in English, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that kind of almost bolsters what Ian and I were just talking about before, which is kind of the lack of clarity that comes with Christianity sometimes. It's interesting because you start off being very critical of your other people's interpretation of Christianity, which I'm probably in agreement with you on. But like, you still call yourself a biblical literalist. So tell me about that.
Well, this is the part that, like, the reason I'm calling this show specifically too, and I've called the Atheist Experience a couple of times, and I don't think they've taken me seriously, but this is the part that I think sets me apart from other callers. You talked about a lack of clarity and, like, what does God even mean? In the beginning, this was silly, but now, like, years later, I have full-on converted to this as my religion. You guys know, you remember the flying spaghetti monster joke?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
That was that's a pretty classic Atheist Experience thing. When people come on a God, you talk about God, you bring up like a flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And not just Atheist Experience, but atheist culture in general kind of talks about it as.
This is based on it.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry, I cut you off. But this is not based on this one thing. We were talking about getting clarity, and this is what I'm talking about. I consider myself a biblical literalist. I went through and just as a joke, just pictured like, hey, what would happen if I take every reference to Jesus Christ and replace it with the flying spaghetti monster? Not only was it a joke, like I genuinely have converted to this faith. I believe that this is the literal interpretation of the Bible. This is the one true religion. And once I did this, literally everything makes sense now. You don't even understand. You don't like this changed my entire life.
What didn't make sense before that makes sense now? I'm sorry, but I hate to interrupt you, but what makes sense, what would you say makes sense now that didn't make sense before? Like what sort of like phenomena is explained by under your new worldview?
Genuinely everything. And how once I interpreted the Bible this way, I found out, it lines up pretty much exactly to what they taught me about evolutionary history in school. And it explains science. It explains everything that I feel like I know in my heart about religion. It really just explains everything.
Okay, well, that's okay. So there's a lot of stuff happening here. This is very interesting. There's a lot to unpack. I'm just going to pick from the hat here because you mentioned evolutionary history. That's very interesting that you say you're a biblical literalist, but you say that the Bible lines up with what evolution was taught to you in school. Explain to me that one, because that's pretty novel to me.
I mean, even just even beyond evolution itself, all of the geologic history that's been taught to me, if
Wait, let's
you go
stick with
back and read the
evolution.
Bible and you assume that God, when it says God, it's talking about food. It's crazy, but it lines up with a lot of stuff. And I don't know. We learned enough about like geology in school to like. Maybe I'm stretching it, but there's a lot of stuff that does kind of line up with the flood narrative. There's some stuff that does. Genesis does kind of. If you take a step back and look at it, but you also stay literal about it. It does line up pretty amazingly with a lot of the stuff that, I don't know, at least at school.
I think folks like Ken Ham have made an entire career out of saying it doesn't, though. Like, that's really weird to me that you say that it does. Because, like, help me figure that out. Like, I really am. I'm so curious.
Do we trust Ken Ham as an authority about anything?
No, I don't trust Ken Ham as well. But my point is,
I believe, and this is something.
John, listen. My point is, a lot of Christians.
I believe
there's a reason why.
The banana thing is generally outright blasphemy.
John, we're talking over each other real quick.
Banana.
I know he's bananas. I know we're on the same page there. But this is my point. There are millions of Christians that agree with Ken Ham, right? Because they look at the Bible and they say, yeah, Earth 6 days, okay, makes sense. Or the universe 6 days, whatever, right? And then 7 days, I guess there was a rest day, whatever, it was 6. And then, they say, okay, there's about 6,000 years or so between then and now. And like, that's the traditional literalist interpretation. But you're saying everything that's been taught in school, which is not 6,000 years, we're talking millions of years in geological events and evolutionary events, right, are happening. Like, I'm very confused how you reconcile that. I want to narrow in. Can you give me a specific example here? Because if I was to read the Bible right now, I would not get evolution from it.
Yeah. That seems like to be the exact opposite of what it's saying, right? It seems like God says like abracadabra and then the world appears, and then he says alakazam, and then all the different species appear, not evolutionarily,
right,
but just via like an act of magic.
Right.
This is where it takes understanding my faith a little bit more to see. Like, you got to see the premise that this follows from. So I feel like I might be jumping in a little too soon here. But going back to the very first form of life, which was clearly blue-green algae, basically my definition of Christ is photosynthesis. I'm getting lost myself here. I'm going back to the very beginning of time, believing that Jesus, the same one that came to us as Jesus as a man, is basically the same cell, the same photosynthetic stem cell that's just been like bouncing around, forever. That explains Jesus' miracles, by the way, too, is that it's a photosynthetic stem cell. That's how it can. I
don't think, John, I again, don't mean to interrupt, but I don't think the consensus is in the scientific community that the first life was photosynthetic stem cells.
Yeah.
Or algae.
It wasn't stem cells. It was blue-green algae. Fair enough. But
I don't even think it's algae. It's we're talking about like tiny protein, molecules basically.
In the beginning was God, and the photosynthetic cell was with God, and the photosynthetic cell was God.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I don't know. We're getting a little sidetracked here. I think that I don't want this to turn into a weird call, but
I agree. I think we are getting a little sidetracked, but you're coming to me with a pretty novel claim here, John. I'm going to be honest. It's not every week that I hear somebody say I'm a biblical literalist and also evolution is real and a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, like this is pretty novel to me. I'm trying to understand your worldview, but I am having a little bit of a hard time. So maybe we take a step back. Let's take a step back. You were convinced you weren't a Christian, and now you are a Christian. Walk me through that process. What premises were you convinced of that changed your mind on that?
To be entirely honest, walking you through my entire journey to faith would probably take too much time.
I don't need your whole life story. All I want is just a few basic things that you learned, and maybe we can go from there.
I was before you had asked for a specific example, and I kind of copped out of that. I was gonna give you one of those, or do you want me to answer this question too? You've asked.
Let's go with this one because like the evolution thing, that's part of a greater whole, right? Which is your belief in Christianity, and I'm very curious about how you arrived to that. What started to change your mind? And again, I don't need your life story. You don't have to tell me every part of that, but you obviously learned some new information, and I want to know what that information is.
Basically, and that's why I brought up the Lord's Prayer at first. My interpretation of Christianity hinges upon the idea that instead of bringing up daily bread, just like for no reason, reminding us that we need to eat as if we needed to do that, Jesus was actually trying to say something way more profound. And it was the early Christians, and it's the Christians now. It was the church the entire time that's been screwing it up. My version of the Lord's Prayer includes the phrase free bread, like given by the churches, not by the government, not by taxes, by churches, and just by good, honorable Christian people who give out free bread because they know it comes from photosynthesis, our Savior.
All right, John, I don't know.
We have been missing the point entirely by thinking that Jesus is anything other than what gives us sustenance every day, which is photosynthesis.
So you became a Christian because you reinterpreted this one Bible verse as meaning something different from what other Christians think?
A lot of Bible verses.
Okay. Okay.
Why draw the line there?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Wait. Why are we drawing the line there? Why not go back one step further and say that the Son is Jesus?
This is where
you're saying like the Son
Hold on,
transmits its beams. The Sun transmits its beams into the photosynthetic cell, and the photosynthetic cell is Jesus. Why not? Why draw the line there? Why not go back the step further and say that the Son is Jesus?
You kind of can. And that's what it said in the Bible, John 1:1. Christ is the Word embodied. The Word, logos, the laws of physics, that's my entire understanding that the laws of physics are our Savior really is what turned my beliefs around. But you talked about, you said bring up another Bible verse, and this is the one that I think really distinguishes me. This is what sets me apart. When I say literalist, I mean literalist. The Last Supper, Jesus said to the disciples, bread is my body, wine is my blood. I said literal. Don't hear what you want to hear. Hear what Jesus said.
Yeah, I don't know, John. I'm not sure where to take this conversation because I'm very interested in knowing this, like how you came to this, and I'm getting reinterpretations of the Bible, right? And I
was working in a movie theater.
Okay.
Maybe a question that I can ask. You said you believe in the flood. If the flood happened, how did the kangaroos get to Australia?
Yeah, let's go with that.
That was the example I was going to bring up too. And can I go with a more specific example myself? We get to the kangaroos, but
sure. As long as it's like in the same vein as like something that shouldn't be there and is now there if a global flood happened.
I believe that the story of the Native Americans and the Native American genocide, it really does line up a lot with Genesis and the idea of Exodus, and then going through the whole Bible where we just kind of accept that Christopher Columbus and the Catholic Church are literally the Antichrist. It kind of makes a lot of sense. I don't know.
John, I feel like this is a troll call at this point. I don't even think you're being serious with me.
Wow. No, that's actually my beliefs. Is you go back with the whole, the Bering Sea receding, coming across the thing, getting cut off. The sea comes back up, and that's why Genghis Khan didn't come over here. Columbus showed up.
Maybe just the kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia?
Yeah, let's go to that.
I, off the top of my head, don't know much about the evolution of kangaroos. Did they evolve there? Did they evolve in Australia? Did they come?
Wouldn't they have all died in the flood? Wouldn't they have all gotten obliterated by the flood? And then the Ark lands where Mount Ararat lands in the Middle East. How did the kangaroos get from the Middle East to Australia?
The Bible did not claim there was an extinction during the flood.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It says super explicitly every single thing that lives and breathes on the that the water is 15 cubits above the tallest mountain. Yeah, it says that it quashed everything that breathes.
That's kind of the whole point. That's why they brought the animals, because there wasn't going to be any left.
Species was saved. It didn't cause any species to go extinct. That's from the Bible.
But how did the kangaroos get from the Middle East to Australia?
It is what it said in the Bible.
But how did the kangaroos get from the Middle East to Australia?
Wouldn't the kangaroos be killed in the flood?
Fossil evidence of proto kangaroos in the Middle East? I'm not familiar with this myself. I'll tell you that.
As far as I'm aware, no.
No.
I don't think that. I assume they evolved in Australia. I don't know.
Yeah. So they all would have been killed.
Not a Christian take, though. That's just off the top. I could Google it. I do a little research first. I assume they probably evolved there. I don't know.
Yeah.
Build an
But if a flood happened like 6,000 years ago, they would all be super dead. Well, like we would see the kangaroos. We'd see kangaroos in like the Middle East, maybe. We wouldn't see kangaroos in Australia.
I don't think those are people who claim to be Christian literalists, claim to be Christians, claim to be followers of Christ, and I don't necessarily agree with their interpretation.
Wait, but you just said there was a global flood event, right? Like you do agree with that?
There have been several. There have been several things that I could point to, and it's almost like a cyclical thing. If you look at Genesis, not only has it happened, it's happened a few times. You kind of understand the patterns.
Okay, but so there's been multiple global flood events.
Yes.
Right, but you don't
to
believe that all life? You believe that somehow life survived in a global flood, because you don't believe they all were extinct.
Yes.
How does that work exactly?
Clearly, we're still here. In the Bible, it said something about Noah building an ark, getting everybody out of there. I believe that that's it may have happened literally, and I kind of do believe that, but it's also an allegory to a lot of natural phenomenon.
I'm an allegorical literalist.
Yeah.
Many, many, many evolutionary bottlenecks we've been through as one family of life. Put it that way.
It's John. I'm gonna be real with you. That doesn't sound like you're a literalist if you're saying this might be an allegory. That is literally the exact opposite of what a literalist believes. Like traditionally, do you know that?
I got to put a disclaimer here. I believe that the Quran is the only authentic, genuine word of God. I do believe there are problems with the other scriptures, but it comes down to how the human authors of those scriptures.
There's no way this has to be a troll. There's no way.
This is very very weird, John. I gotta say, I don't know that you're being serious with me. If you are, maybe we could have a conversation at a different time. But
I believe. What the heck's going on?
I don't know about that, John. I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and let you go for now, though, because we do have to get to some other callers. Listen, I really want to challenge you to look up what, in case you are serious, because I don't know, but really look up what biblical literalists mean when they say that they're biblical literalists, and see if that word still applies to you. Because I have a feeling when you really look at what it is or what other people use it, you wouldn't use that word for yourself. If you have a different word for yourself, that's fine. But you are not a literalist, my friend, at least not in the traditional sense.